She found him in the driver's seat of a bullet-riddled Maserati, clutching an infant like it was the last prayer left in a godless city. He was bleeding out, and he was aiming a gun straight at her face. The December wind screamed down Fifth Avenue like a promise of death, a cold so deep it turned bone to glass. Jenna Forbes burrowed into the steam grate outside Grand Central, the last warm breath of the city. Her ribs ached from where a cop's boot had caught her last night. Her stomach had been empty since she'd traded her last protein bar for a pair of mismatched socks 2 days ago. The cold was winning. Desperation, an old friend, whispered a new plan. Find a parking garage. Concrete sheltered from the wind. Cars, recently parked, held residual engine heat like a life-saving gift. She slipped into the multi-level garage under a luxury high-rise, her sneakers silent on the oil-stained concrete. The silence here was thick, expensive. She found it on the 3rd level, a sleek black Maserati, still ticking as it cooled. Jenna reached for the door handle, not to steal, just to lean against the warm hood, maybe curl in the footwell for an hour. The door was unlocked. She pulled it open, and the coppery smell hit her first. Then the sight. Fotzo Roberto was slumped against the leather, his head lolled back. A dark, blossoming stain covered the left side of his pristine white shirt, turning the fabric into a grotesque canvas. His right arm was locked around a bundle of cream-colored cashmere blanket pressed tightly to his chest. A tiny, perfect hand emerged, fingers splayed. His left hand, trembling but deliberate, held a polished silver pistol. It rose slowly, the barrel finding the space between Jenna's eyes as his own fluttered open. Dark, depthless, swimming with pain and a terrifying clarity. Close the door, he rasped, the words thick with an accent she placed as Italian, maybe Sicilian. Or, I paint the window with your brains. Jenna froze, the cold forgotten. Her eyes darted from the gun to the baby, whose face was now visible, pale, peaceful in sleep, a stark contrast to the blood and death holding him. A single drop of crimson had fallen on the blanket, blooming like a tiny rose. You're bleeding out, Jenna said, her voice steady. A voice she used to calm raving drunks and scared kids on the street. The baby's in shock. He's too quiet. Not your problem. Fotzo gritted out, but the gun wavered. A shudder ran through him. Walk away. Jenna thought of the cold outside, of the endless, invisible crawl toward nothing. She thought of the last time someone needed her, her mother, coughing her lungs out in shelter cot, holding Jenna's hand until it went limp. Don't you leave me, baby. Don't you let go. She didn't walk away. She took a slow, deliberate step closer, hands raised, palms empty. My name's Jenna. I know a place. It's warm. It's safe. No one will look for you there. No one looks for me anywhere, Jenna said, a bitter truth. That's the point. Now, are you going to shoot the only person in this city who gives a damn if that baby lives through the night, or are you going to let me save your son? His eyes held hers. The battle inside him was visible, paranoia versus paternal terror. The gun dipped just an inch. A groan escaped him, part pain, part surrender. Please, he whispered, the words stripped raw. Jenna nodded. Okay, but we move now. She reached for the baby, her movements careful, ritualistic. What's his name? Leo. Fotzo breathed as she gently extracted the warm, silent bundle from his failing grasp. Hello, Leo, Jenna murmured, tucking the blanket tighter. She looked back at Fotzo, at the blood, at the impossible task ahead. My car's a shopping cart. Your ride's totaled. So we walk. And you're going to have to trust me. He said nothing, just tried to push himself upright, his face gray. Jenna shifted Leo to one arm, slid the other under Fotzo's shoulder, taking his weight. It nearly crushed her. He was all solid muscle and expensive wool, a giant bleeding out in a concrete tomb. On 3, she said, her own breath coming short. We're going to the one place in New York nobody ever thinks to look. Where's that? He managed. Jenna smiled, a thin, sharp thing. Home. 7 blocks became a death march. Fotzo leaned on Jenna, his weight grinding her into the frozen concrete with every step. Leo was a silent, warm weight in the crook of her other arm. She navigated by the city's scars, alley mouths, camera blind spots, shadows that belonged to her. Her sanctuary was a myth to the world above, a rusted service door marked with a faded city seal near the river. She shouldered it open. Dank, metallic air washed over them. The door clanged shut, sealing them in a dripping concrete throat lit only by her stolen lantern. Fotzo sagged against the wall. "This is your place? It's dry. It's warm enough. And no one thinks to look here." Her home was a foam pad and a milk crate table. It was everything she had. She laid Leo down, then turned to Fotzo. "Shirt off." He complied, his movements clumsy. The wound was a dark, angry hole high on his chest.
No exit.
The bullet was still inside. Jenna's supplies were a joke. Vodka, duct tape, tweezers from a multi-tool. "This will hurt," she warned, dousing a rag. He just nodded, jaw clenched. As she cleaned the blood, she saw the tattoos clearly for the first time. Not street ink. Art. A lion. Thorny script. A king's markings. "Who are you?" she asked, probing gently with the tweezers. "Fotzo Roberto." A pause, heavy as the earth above them. "My organization wants me dead. They killed my wife. Framed me for it. Now they're cleaning house." His dark eyes locked on Leo. "Heirs are inconvenient." The word landed like a stone in Jenna's gut. Organization. The suit. The car. The lethal stillness beneath the pain. "Mafia," she breathed. A single nod. "The Camorra. The man who gave the order was my brother. In all but blood." The heir turned to lead. She was in a hole, treating a mob boss, holding his baby. The absurdity was a tidal wave. "You need a real doctor."
No.
"The man who would be my doctor is the one who sent the shooters." His voice was final. "Trust is a luxury that gets you killed." As if on cue, Leo stirred. A thin, hungry cry pierced the silence. Fotzo's head snapped toward the sound, all his hardened control shattered into pure panic. Jenna moved on instinct. She pulled out her dented thermos, her last luxury, warmed milk, and poured a little into a cup. Cradling Leo, she let a drop touch his lips. He latched on, suckling fiercely. The crying stopped. In the new quiet, Fotzo watched, his expression unguarded and ravaged. "You are a ghost," he said, his voice rough. "A part of the city I never see. And now you are the only solid thing left." Jenna didn't know how to answer that. She focused on Leo until he slept again, then turned back to Fotzo with the tweezers. His eyes were closed now, consciousness slipping. The metal glinted in the weak light. Above them, the city thrummed, oblivious. Down here, there was only the wound, the tool, and her two trembling hands. She took a steadying breath and began. The fever came with the dawn. A damp, invisible sunrise in the tunnels meant only a change in the rumble of trains overhead. Fotzo burned beside her, shivering on the foam pad. Jenna swapped vodka-soaked rags on his forehead, the sharp smell cutting through the tunnel's grime. "The safe," he muttered, his eyes glassy, fixed on the dripping ceiling. Luciana, she knew. She was always smarter. Jenna kept her voice low, calm. "Knew what, Fotzo?"
Marco.
The name was a curse. "My right hand. My brother." A racking cough shook him. "He didn't just want my seat. He wanted my life. My wife. My son's future." The story spilled out in fever-broken pieces. Luciana Roberto had not been a decorative wife. She was the daughter of a Sicilian financier, the family's bridge to legitimate wealth. She'd grown suspicious of the books, of Marco's new alliances with a brash Russian crew moving fentanyl. She confronted him, Fotzo whispered. Told him she would take the evidence to the commission in Palermo. Have him stripped of everything. His hand, hot and dry, clamped over Jenna's wrist. He had her car bombed the next day. Made it look like the Russians. And he made sure I was the one who suggested the route she took that night. The guilt in his voice was a living thing, corrosive and heavy. He had handed his wife her death sentence. The proof, Jenna pressed, gently prying his fingers loose. Where is it? Luciana's safety deposit box. The Metropole Bank. 5th Avenue. He recited a 10-digit number, his eyes slipping closed. The code. Our anniversary. But the key, the physical key, he trailed off, frustration cutting through the fever. She wore it. A stupid, sentimental locket. I buried it with her. The finality of it hit Jenna like a physical blow. The only piece of hard evidence that could clear his name and expose the traitor was in a casket 6 feet under in a mausoleum on Long Island. A location known only to the dead. So they're not just hunting you to take over, Jenna said, the full picture crystallizing with terrifying clarity. They're hunting you because you're the only one who knows. You're the loose end. And Leo is the only other soul who carries her blood. Fotzo finished, his voice grim. Lucio cannot claim the Roberto legacy while my son breathes. It's not business. It's purification. The word hung in the damp air. This wasn't a corporate takeover. It was a dynastic coup. A bloody changing of the guard where the old king and his heir had to be erased completely. A sudden, sharp sound echoed down the tunnel, the screech of metal on metal, far away but distinct. Not a train.
A door.
A heavy door being forced. Jenna froze, her blood turning to ice. Fotzo's eyes snapped open, fever replaced by instant, lethal alertness. He tried to push himself up, a stifled groan escaping him. How many? He breathed. Jenna killed the lantern, plunging them into absolute blackness. She scooped up Leo, who stirred but, mercifully, didn't cry. In the dark, her other hand found the cool metal of the multi-tool. It was a pathetic weapon against guns. Footsteps now. Muffled, cautious, but moving with purpose.
2 sets.
Maybe 3. The beam of a flashlight sliced through the darkness 50 yards away, sweeping over pipes and graffiti. Check the side passages, a low voice ordered. He's hurt. He can't have gone far. There in the tunnels, Marco's men weren't just watching the streets, they were sweeping the city's veins. Fotzo's hand found her arm in the dark. His touch was an urgent signal. He pointed silently to a narrow overflow pipe opening just behind their nest, barely large enough to crawl through. It was a retreat, a surrender of the only home she had. The flashlight beam swept closer, highlighting the grime on the wall just 10 feet away. Jenna made the choice in a heartbeat. She shoved the few supplies she could carry into her bag, clutched Leo to her chest, and began to crawl backwards into the tight, suffocating darkness of the pipe, pulling Fotzo behind her by his good arm. As the light finally fell on their abandoned foam pad, illuminating the blood-stained rags, Jenna knew one thing for certain. The hunters weren't just rivals. They were family. And family knew all your hiding places. The overflow pipe dumped them into a storm drain that reeked of decay. They emerged, blinking, into a gray dawn behind a chaotic bodega in Hell's Kitchen. Fotzo was gray with pain, barely conscious. Leo, wrapped tight in the now filthy cashmere blanket, began a thin, persistent wail of hunger and cold. They were exposed, hunted, and falling apart. Jenna's mind clicked into a different gear. This wasn't about Mafia codes or secret keys. This was about the city's clockwork, the invisible shifts and silent trades that kept the underbelly alive. She needed her network. Her first stop was the all-night grind, a coffee shop where the espresso machine screamed from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Mo, the barista with sleepless eyes, saw Jenna's face and the bundled baby and didn't ask questions. He slid 2 large coffees and a banana across the counter. Bad night, he murmured, filling a clean travel cup with warm milk. The worst, Jenna whispered back, tucking a folded 20 from Fotzo's wallet. All they had, under a napkin. You hear anything? Men asking around? Looking for a man and a baby? Mo's eyes flickered to Fotzo, slumped in a corner booth, radiating danger even in his broken state. Heavy guys. Italian accents. Not the usual muscle. They were in here 2 hours ago. flash in a picture of some fancy guy in a suit.
He leaned in.
They're offering serious cash for a tip. More for the kid. Said something about tying up a bloodline. Creepy shit. Asterisk a bounty. On a baby. Asterisk Jenna's stomach turned. Thanks, Mo. The train. Frankie's on the 4 a.m. to noon shift. He sees everything, Mo said quietly, a coded offering. And if you need a patch-up, you know where the night nurse sits. Jenna nodded, the map of her survival network redrawn as an intelligence grid. She took the warm milk for Leo and left. Frankie, the train driver, wasn't hard to find. On his smoke break at the 42nd Street switch room, he watched the trio approach with the weary gaze of a man who'd seen it all.
Jenna.
You're daylight folk now, he grunted, eyeing Fotzo. Need a whisper, Frankie. These heavy guys. They using the trains. Frankie took a long drag.
Seeing.
Sweeping the homeless camps in the tunnels by the old post office. Not with batons. With pictures. And they're not asking the cops. They're paying the sergeants. He dropped his cigarette, crushed it. Word in the cab is some big meet is happening tonight. All the old Italian crews. At that social club in Carroll Gardens. Sounds like a, what do you call it? A coronation. Lucio wasn't just hunting. He was consolidating. Tonight. The final stop was the hardest. St. Vincent's ER waiting room. Nurse Anya sat behind the triage desk, her face a mask of professional calm that softened a fraction when she saw Jenna. No beds, Anya said automatically. Then her eyes fell on Leo. The baby. He's okay. Warm milk. I need supplies, Anya. Antibiotics. Sterile gauze. A real surgical suture kit. Jenna's voice was low, urgent. And information. Have they been here? Asking? Anya's gaze swept over Fotzo, taking in the pallor, the pain, the clear bullet wound geometry of his posture. A war flashed in her eyes. Oath versus instinct. 2 men. An hour ago. They didn't ask. They showed a badge. Federal. But they weren't federal. She slid a small, pre-packed Ziploc of medical supplies across the counter. They said they were looking for a kidnapping victim. An infant. They showed a birth certificate.
Leo Roberto.
The world tilted. Lucio was working both sides, the street and the state. He had made Fotzo a fugitive and Leo a hostage in official paperwork. Jenna took the supplies, her fingers trembling. Thank you. Jenna, Anya said, stopping her. Her voice was barely a whisper. The one in charge, the one they called consigliere, he was here himself. Smooth. Nice suit. He said to tell anyone who asked. She swallowed. He said, heirs are messy. Best to return what isn't yours. They were rats in a concrete maze, and the terriers had caught their scent. The first warning was the silence. The familiar, distant whump-whump of trains ceased. The tunnels held their breath. Jenna knew that silence. It meant the MTA had cleared the line. It meant someone with power and money had requested it. They're coming, she hissed, shaking Fotzo awake from his fevered doze.
Now.
He was on his feet in an instant, pain forgotten, the predator overriding the patient. He shoved the few supplies into the bag and took Leo from her arms without a word. His eyes, reflecting the dim emergency light, were flat and deadly. Which way? Jenna pointed left, away from the main tunnel, into a narrower service shaft marked with faded danger signs. It's a choke point, but it leads to the old station. They moved as one, a broken, silent unit. Fotzo's breathing was a ragged concertina behind her. Leo, thank God, slept on. They were 50 yards into the shaft when the voices echoed behind them, distorted by concrete and distance, but chillingly clear. Blood on the rags. They're here. Fan out. Boots on gravel, moving fast. Jenna pushed them harder, reaching a junction where 3 pipes converged. She chose the middle, the smallest, pulling Fotzo in. Don't touch the walls. The rust echoes. They crouched in the damp dark, listening. The boots split up. One set past their pipe, so close Jenna smelled the stale cigarette smoke on the man's jacket. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A drumbeat she was sure would give them away. A sharp, metallic clang rang out from the direction of their nest, a door being kicked in. Clear. They bolted. Find them. The boss wants the kid alive. The man doesn't matter. Alive. The word was more terrifying than a death sentence. Leo was a trophy, a symbol to be paraded and then disposed of once Marco's power was secure. The hunters moved past. Jenna waited a full minute, then tugged Fotzo deeper into the labyrinth. Her map was in her bones, the drip of a specific leak, the hum of a forgotten electrical line. She led them through a crack in a tiled wall into the cavernous gloom of an abandoned subway platform. Advertisements for products that no longer existed peeled from the walls. The air was thick with the ghost of mildew and old cigarettes. "We can catch our breath here," she whispered, helping Fotzo lean against a rusted turnstile. It was a mistake. A flashlight beam speared the darkness from the platform's far end, pinning them like insects. There. Jenna didn't think. She shoved Fotzo toward a shattered token booth. Through the back. Go. A gunshot exploded, deafening in the enclosed space. Chips of century-old tile exploded near her head. Fotzo returned fire with his silver pistol, two sharp cracks that made Jenna flinch. A man cried out. "Run!" Fotzo roared. They ran, stumbling down the abandoned tracks, the flashlight beam jerking wildly behind them. Jenna's lungs burned. Fotzo was flagging, his strength bleeding out with every step. Leo woke and began to scream, his cries echoing off the tunnel walls, a beacon for the hunters. Jenna saw their escape, a maintenance ladder leading up to a street-level grate. There. Up. She went first, scrambling up the cold rungs with Leo clutched to her chest. At the top, she shoved against the heavy iron grate. It gave with a rusty shriek, spilling gray afternoon light into the tunnel. She hauled herself out, then reached back for Fotzo. He was halfway up when a hand grabbed his ankle from below. Fotzo kicked out viciously. He fired his last round blindly down the shaft. A scream of pain. He scrambled the rest of the way, collapsing onto the filthy asphalt of a back alley as Jenna slammed the grate shut. They lay gasping in a heap of trash bags, the sounds of furious pursuit now muffled beneath their feet. They were in the meatpacking district. Exposed. Fotzo looked at her, his face etched with pain and a new, grim respect. They knew exactly where to look. Jenna nodded, the truth a cold stone in her gut. Her sanctuary wasn't just burned. It had been betrayed. Someone in her network had talked. The city's veins were no longer safe. The Hotel Verona rose like a gilded tombstone over Fifth Avenue. Fotzo's territory, or it had been. Now, entering through the staff entrance, his keycard in Jenna's trembling hand, felt like walking into a gilded trap. The room was a symphony of silent luxury. Thick carpets swallowed sound. The view was a postcard of Central Park. The bed looked wider than Jenna's entire tunnel home. Leo, washed and fed with room service milk, slept swaddled in a monogrammed tile in the center of it. Jenna stood by the window, wearing a maid's uniform she'd lifted from a service cart. The stiff, starched fabric was a stranger on her skin. She felt like a smudge on a masterpiece, a ghost haunting a palace. Every reflection in the dark glass showed a girl who didn't belong. "He's secure." Fotzo's voice came from behind her, rough with exhaustion. He'd showered, the blood and grime of the tunnels circling the drain. A fresh white hotel robe covered his bandaged shoulder. He looked less like a dying man and more like a king in temporary exile. The juxtaposition was dizzying. For how long? Jenna didn't turn. "Lucio owns your money. Your men. He'll own this hotel's security feeds by morning. He won't look here. It's too obvious. A wounded animal doesn't return to its den. You're not an animal. You're a king whose kingdom revolted. They'll look everywhere." Silence stretched, filled with the hum of the minibar and the distant wail of sirens, the city's true heartbeat. When she finally turned, he was closer than she expected. The clean scent of hotel soap and his own fading cologne mixed with the antiseptic tang of his wound. "You saved us in the tunnels," he said, his dark eyes tracing the lines of her stolen uniform, seeing the person beneath. Your city. Your rules. I didn't understand them. I was arrogant. You were dying. I've been dying for years. The admission hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. Living in castles, surrounded by enemies in silk ties. I forgot what real survival looked like. It doesn't look like a boardroom. It looks like you, in the dark, with a multi-tool and a thermos of milk. His gaze was a physical weight. It didn't slide over her like she was invisible. It saw her. The grime under her nails, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the steady hands that had held his son and his life. For the first time in years, Jenna Forbes was not a ghost. She was the most solid thing in the room. He raised a hand, slow and deliberate, and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His fingertips were calloused, at odds with the robe and the luxury. The touch was electric, a spark in the sterile air. She didn't pull away. The warmth of his skin was a brand. This was madness. He was a constellation of trouble, a dying star pulling her into his violent orbit. But in this suspended moment, high above the city that had tried to erase her, his orbit felt like the only place that was real. His thumb grazed her lower lip. A question. From the bed, Leo made a soft, sleepy sound. The spell shattered, but the charge in the air remained. Jenna stepped back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. You need to rest. The fever could come back. Fotzo's hand dropped, but his eyes still held hers, a promise and a threat tangled together. What I need, he said, his voice low, is to remember how to be something more than a target. You remind me. He turned and walked to the vast bed, sinking onto the edge with a weary sigh to watch his son sleep. The king and the heir, in a stolen castle. Jenna retreated to the marble bathroom, locking the door. She stared at her reflection in the harsh light, the maid's uniform, her own wild eyes. She was living a fairy tale written in blood. And the most terrifying part wasn't the hunters outside. It was the dangerous, undeniable pull she felt toward the wounded king in the other room. The hotel room's opulence had become a cage. The air was too clean, the silence too loud. Jenna paced, the plush carpet muffling her steps. They couldn't stay. Marco's coronation was tonight. The clock was a bomb in her chest. Then it clicked. A memory, sharp and clear. The angel, she said, stopping mid-pace. Fotzo looked up from where he was cleaning his gun, a disassembled puzzle of lethal metal on a silk bedspread. What?
A man.
They call him Angel. He camps in the doorway of the shuttered bakery across from the Carroll Gardens Social Club.
Vietnam Viet.
Says he's guarding it. She met Fotzo's skeptical gaze. He's not crazy. He sees everything. The cops ignore him. Your guys, they probably step over him. He's part of the sidewalk. Understanding dawned in Fotzo's eyes, followed by a flicker of reluctant hope. You think he saw something? On the night your wife died. Where was Marco? Fotzo's jaw tightened. He told the commission he was at a charity dinner in Midtown. Solid alibi. Dozens of witnesses. But the club has private entrances. Back alleys. Jenna was already grabbing the maid's uniform jacket. If he met someone, if he did business that night, Angel would have seen. The invisible see everything. It was a desperate gamble. But it was the only move they had left. An hour later, Jenna was a phantom in Carroll Gardens. The social club was a nondescript brownstone with dark windows and a polished brass door knocker. The air here was different, quiet, watchful. And there, in a nest of blankets and shopping bags in the recessed doorway of the old Bella Vita bakery, was Angel. His face was a roadmap of hard living, but his eyes were clear, sharp blue. Angel, Jenna whispered, crouching. He didn't seem surprised to see her. His gaze went past her, scanning the street. You're with the Broken King, he stated, his voice like gravel. Smells like trouble. You see him? The man who comes and goes from that door. The smooth one.
Marco.
A slow nod. Sees him. Hears him. Thinks the night owns his secrets. Angel rummaged in a plastic bag and pulled out a small, black rectangle, a waterproof USB drive. Garbage day after the lady died. The smooth ones man tossed a bag from a black car. Nervous. This was in it with coffee grounds. Jenna's breath caught. She took the drive. It was cool, innocuous. Batteries dead. But the files, they're loud, Angel said, tapping his temple. The smooth one, meeting a snake-tattooed man in that alley. The night of the boom. Shaking hands. Passing a brick of money. The snake man, he's the one the news called the Russian bomber. They were partners. The proof. Not in a buried locket, but in a dumpster, guarded by a man the world had forgotten. Why keep it? Jenna asked, her throat tight. Angel looked at the social club, his expression unreadable. The lady, the king's wife. She brought me coffee. Called me by my name. Frank. Not Angel. Not Buddy. Frank. He looked back at Jenna. The king, he never saw me. The smooth one steps on me. But the lady saw. Everyone deserves a witness. Back in a stolen internet connection at a public library, the drive's contents glowed on a monitor. The video was grainy, from a doorbell camera across the alley, but unmistakable. Marco, in a tuxedo, shaking hands with a known explosives trafficker named Gregor, the Serpent Volkov. The timestamp, 2 hours before Luciana Roberto's car exploded. The audio was faint but clear. Make it clean, like the Russians, the wife's route is confirmed. The final file was a scanned document, a life insurance policy for Luciana, taken out by Marco, with Fotzo listed as the beneficiary. The ultimate frame-up. Jenna ejected the drive, her hands steady. She had it. The proof that could burn Marco's new kingdom to the ground. She returned to the hotel room, the tiny drive burning a hole in her pocket. She found Fotzo standing at the window, holding a sleeping Leo. He turned and she didn't need to speak. He saw the truth on her face. She held up the drive. The angel saw. The street remembered. Fotzo took it, his fingers closing around the plastic like it was a holy relic. His eyes, when they met hers, were volcanic. Not just with rage, but with a devastating, grief-stricken relief. The truth was a weapon, and it had been delivered by the people he'd spent a lifetime never seeing. Tonight, he said, the word of vow. We take it to his coronation. We show the family what their new king really is. Jenna nodded. The invisible girl and the dethroned king, armed with a truth salvaged from the trash. It was time to crash a party. The Brownstones' parlor was a museum of old-world power. Dark wood, cigar smoke, and the silent assessment of 24 men in expensive suits. The air tasted of expensive scotch and impending violence. At the head of the room, Lucio stood before the empty chairman's seat, a glass raised in a toast that died on his lips as the doors opened. Fotzo Roberto walked in, leaning heavily on Jenna's shoulder. He was pale, his suit jacket hanging open over his bandages, but his gaze was a laser that swept the room, silencing it. Jenna, beside him in simple, clean clothes that still felt like a costume, carried Leo, a living, breathing accusation. Marco's smile was a masterpiece of cold pity.
Fotzo.
You look terrible. We heard you were indisposed. And you brought a stray. His eyes flicked over Jenna with dismissive contempt. This is a family meeting. That's why I'm here, brother. Fotzo's voice cut through the haze. To talk about family. And betrayal. A murmur rippled through the council. Old men shifted in their chairs. Younger soldiers' hands drifted toward hidden holsters. You are weak, Lucio said, his tone turning clinical, addressing the room. You let the Russians kill your wife. You endangered our operations with your grief.
The family needs strength.
Not a ghost haunted by a ghost. The only ghost here, Fotzo said, taking a painful step forward, is the one you created. You killed Luciana. You hired Gregor Volkov. And you framed me to take my chair. Laughter, harsh and disbelieving, came from Marco's lieutenants. Proof, an old capo barked. You don't accuse a consigliere without proof, Fotzo. Have you lost your mind along with your strength? The proof, Jenna said, her voice clear and startling in the masculine gloom, isn't in a safe. It's in the alley where he met the bomber, and in the dumpster where his man tossed it. Every eye turned to her, a mix of shock and hostility. A woman, a nobody, speaking in their sanctum.
Marco's smirk returned.
The street girl speaks? Ignore her. You ignore me, Jenna said, stepping forward, placing herself between Fotzo and the council. She held up the small black drive. You ignore the night shift barista who heard your bounty. You ignore the train driver who sees your sweep teams. You ignore the homeless vet, Frank, who sits across the street and sees everything. Her gaze locked on Marco. You think power makes you invisible, but it just makes you blind. She walked to an antique sideboard, plugged the drive into a laptop someone had left open, and turned the screen to face the room. The grainy video played. Marco, in his tuxedo. The serpent. The handshake. The damning audio. Then, the scanned insurance document filled the screen. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft whir of the laptop fan. Marco's face drained of color, then flooded with furious red. This is a fabrication. A desperate trick. The timestamp is from the club's own security feed server, Jenna said, her voice steady. The audio was cleaned by a library computer. The insurance document is from your office safe, Marco.
Frank saw which bag it was in.
You didn't burn the evidence. You just threw it away, where you throw everything you don't value. The accusation hung in the air, more powerful for its simplicity. The betrayal wasn't just of Fotzo, but of their entire code, careless, arrogant, and witnessed by the invisible city. The old capo stood, his face like stone.
Marco.
Explain this. There was no explanation, only reaction. Marco's hand flashed toward his inside jacket holster. Fotzo was faster. His silver pistol was already in his hand. The shot was a deafening roar in the confined space. Lucio stumbled back, a red flower blooming on his pristine white shirt, shock etching his features. Chausis erupted. Chairs overturned. Men drew weapons. Fotzo shoved Jenna and Leo behind the heavy oak sideboard, laying down covering fire. It was not a battle, but a brutal, decisive pruning. Fotzo's shots were precise, aimed at Marco's loyalists. Some of the older members stood back, having seen all they needed. It was over in less than a minute. The acrid smell of gunpowder replaced cigar smoke. Lucio lay dead on the Persian rug. 2 of his lieutenants were down. The rest stood frozen, weapons lowered, looking to the bleeding, defiant man who had just reclaimed his throne with a bullet and a USB drive. Fotzo lowered his gun, his breath coming in harsh gasps. He looked at the stunned, silent council. Then his eyes found Jenna's over the edge of the sideboard. The ghost had spoken. The king had returned. And the streets had provided the key to it all. Sunlight, real and unfiltered by grate or grime, flooded the renovated penthouse overlooking Central Park. The scent was of fresh coffee and lemon polish, not damp concrete. Weeks had scabbed over the wounds. Fotzo's shoulder had healed into a fierce, rope scar beneath his tailored shirt. Leo, in a sun-drenched playpen, giggled at the mobile spinning above him, a sound that had become the new soundtrack of Jenna's life. The table in the study was not the heavy, intimidating slab from the social club. It was modern, clean-lined. Around it sat the renewed council. Some old faces, wary but respectful. Newer, younger ones Fotzo had elevated, men who understood that survival in the modern city required more than just muscle. And there was Jenna. She wore a simple, elegant dress the color of charcoal, her hair pulled back. The street hadn't left her eyes, it had just given her a better vantage point. She was no longer a ghost in a palace. She was a fixture. The distribution proposal from the Queen's crew is a front, she said, her voice calm, tapping a financial spreadsheet on the tablet before her. The numbers from their so-called laundromats don't match the water usage data. The city's utility portal doesn't lie. They're moving something else. Probably the fentanyl Lucio was courting. The capo from Queens, a grizzled man named Sal, stared at her, then at Fotzo, sputtering. This is how we do business now. On city data. We do business on what's real, Fotzo said, his voice quiet but final. He didn't look at Sal. His gaze was on Jenna, a quiet pride in its depths. Jenna sees the city. The whole city. Not just our corners of it. Ignoring her is how Lucio failed. We will not. The meeting continued, shifting to legitimate ventures, the recycling plants, the union partnerships Fotzo was prioritizing. Jenna listened, asked pointed questions about safety regulations and community outreach, seeing angles the old guard missed. She was the translator between their world and the real one. After the men had filed out, murmuring amongst themselves, Fotzo rose and walked to the window where Jenna stood, looking out at the sprawling, breathing organism of New York. You unsettle them, he said, coming to stand beside her. Good, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. They should be unsettled. He was silent for a moment. I could give you an apartment. Money.
Security. You could leave all this behind.
Live a normal life. Jenna finally turned to look at him, sipping coffee on a balcony, pretending I don't know how the pipes underneath me really work. That's not a life. That's another kind of hiding. She glanced at Leo, who was now chewing contentedly on a stuffed lion. You offered me a seat at the table, Fotzo. Not charity. A purpose. I'm taking it. He didn't smile, but the warmth in his eyes was more profound than any grin. He reached out, his hand, the one that had held a gun to her, that had clutched a son, that had signed death warrants and now signed business contracts, cupped her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. Then stay, he said, the word simple a vow. As my advisor, as my partner, as family, this is your home. The word landed softly, but its weight was immense. Home, it wasn't a tunnel or a doorway. It wasn't a temporary shelter. It was a place, a purpose, a person. She looked from the glittering, deceptive skyline to the peaceful child, to the dangerous, complex man who saw her not as a street girl, but as a queen his kingdom had been missing. For the first time since she could remember, a deep, settled warmth permeated her very core. The perpetual cold that had lived in her bones, the cold of the streets, of hunger, of invisibility, was gone, melted away by a heat of her own making. She leaned into his touch. Okay, she whispered. It was the same word she'd spoken in a blood-stained garage. But this time, it wasn't the beginning of a desperate escape. It was the start of a dynasty. Want more dangerous love stories where the forgotten become the most powerful? Then you need to be part of our dark romance family. Smash that like button. If your heart is pounding for Jenna and Fotzo, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a moment of our next high-stakes, heart-thrilling tale. Comment seat at the table below and tell us what part had you on the edge of your seat. Every click tells us to keep bringing you the stories where love is a battlefield and the most unlikely heroines claim their crown. Don't miss what we're unraveling next.